Carolina were unlawful, curtailing affirmative action at colleges and universities around the nation, a policy that has long been a pillar of higher education. The vote was 6-3, with the court's liberal members in dissent. The decision was expected to set off a scramble as schools revisit their admissions practices, and it could complicate diversity efforts elsewhere, narrowing the pipeline of highly credentialed minority candidates and making it harder for employers to even consider race in hiring. More broadly, the decision was the latest illustration that the court's conservative majority continues to move at a brisk pace to upend decades of jurisprudence and redefine aspects of American life on contentious issues like abortion, guns, and now race, all in the space of 1 year. Views on affirmative action are split along racial and political lines. A Pew survey shows a clear divide along ethnic lines, with the majority of white and Asian adults disapproving of racial consideration in admissions, while African Americans largely approve and Hispanics are about evenly split. In other news today, former school resource officer Scott Peterson was found guilty of all 11 charges associated with the mass shooting at Stormy Daniels High School in Parkland, Florida, 5 years ago. Now, you will recall a mass shooter killed 17 and left dozens of other students wounded. In a novel case that would have had far-reaching implications for school resource officers, Florida prosecutors relied on a statute to argue Peterson was a caregiver that breached his duty to the students by waiting outside for 44 minutes while the shooter roamed from the first floor to the third floor, shooting and killing students. And the much-awaited California Reparations Task Force is out with its report, recommending that the state of California be the first to offer reparations to descendants of slaves. The 1,000-plus page report offers over 115 recommendations that address harms from emotional trauma to education inequality. Two transgender care bans for minors were partially blocked yesterday. Kentucky and Tennessee judges temporarily halted restrictions that would have stopped transgender minors from receiving hormone therapy and puberty blockers. A growing number of states are passing laws to restrict gender-affirming care for young people, but the laws have faced roadblocks in federal court. Well, the Koch network has raised over $70 million to sink Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Americans for Prosperity Action is wading into a Republican presidential primary for the very first time and waiting to see which candidate it will get behind for 2024. The political network established by the conservative industrialists Charles and David Koch has raised more than $70 million for political races as it looks to help Republicans move past Donald J. Trump. The number of people in Los Angeles County living in cars, on the sidewalks, or tucked away in tents or sleeping in shelters rose by 9% from a year ago. The latest measure of how intractable the homelessness crisis has become in California. The increase in Los Angeles mirrors trends playing out in cities across the country, including Phoenix, as a housing shortage has led to rising costs that's squeezing families. Now, a recent study led by an expert on homelessness at the University of California, San Francisco, found that a lack of affordable housing and not mental illness or substance abuse was the main driver of homelessness in California. Well, it's been a huge news day, and I am Areva Martin, and you are listening to Areva Martin in real time. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. I cannot think of two more brilliant contributors to have with me today on such a big news day than Dr. Nii-Quartelai Quartey. He's a KBLA National Political Affairs Analyst. He happens to be in Washington for the show. He's also host of A More Perfect Union on KBLA Sundays at 10 a.m. and then again at 10 p.m. Also joining us from the DMV is Dr. Omekongo Dibinga. He's a senior lecturer at American University and author of a new book, Lies About Black People. And in hour two, we are going beyond and behind the headlines and digging deep on those stories that has everyone talking. And today, that is this historic overturning of affirmative action in college admissions. Now, what the court did today was effectively overturn a 2003 ruling in Grutter v. Bollinger, in which the court said race could be considered as a factor in the admissions process because universities had a compelling interest in maintaining diverse campuses. In doing so today, in this ruling today, the court has scrapped that decision as well as decades of precedent, including a ruling dating back to 1978 that upheld a limited consideration of race in university admissions as a way to combat historic discrimination against Black people and other minorities. In hour two, I have an expert panel here to help us break down today's decision and to put in perspective what it will mean for college campuses around this country. You don't want to miss hour two. But before I bring on my guest, here is what I'm thinking about in real time. You know, sometimes you have to keep it 100, and today is one of those days. How ironic is it that on the same day that the Supreme Court guts affirmative action and deals a blow to educational equity, that the California Task Force releases its long-awaited reparations report. Now, this report, as I said, has over 115 recommendations. The task force spent the last 2 years hearing testimony from academics, economists, and other experts to gather evidence of the effects of slavery and to prove the ways in which government-sanctioned policies continue to discriminate against Black people long after slavery was abolished. The remedies in the report for lawmakers go far beyond cash payments, which is oftentimes what people want to focus on. But this report includes policies to end the death penalty, pay fair market value for jail and prison labor, restore voting rights to all formerly and currently incarcerated people, apply rent caps to historically redlined zip codes that disadvantage Black residents, and ironically, to offer free college tuition to people who are eligible for reparations. Now, that's just some of the 115 recommendations in this report. The question now is, what happens next? Members who are in the California State Legislature and also in the task force reminded us that it's now up to the California State Legislature to decide which elements, if any, from this report will become actual bills that will get voted on by the supermajority Dem legislature in California and then make their way to the governor's desk to be either signed or vetoed. And these lawmakers have made it clear this is a Herculean task, i.e., the task of getting some of these recommendations actually passed into law. One of the professors at UMass who've been studying reparations says that most folks think that Black folks aren't worthy, aren't entitled, don't deserve any remedies. See, there's a belief that the descendants of slaves don't deserve anything, not just cash payments, but educational systems that are fair, housing that's affordable and accessible, or even an apology. These folks in this survey say that any sort of debt, if it existed, was to be paid to slaves. The last slave, according to these folks, is long gone. And so they say the debt that might have been owed died with the last slave. Whew. If you are to believe these people and this poll, then today's affirmative action decision, as well as this report out showing that Black folks are disproportionately represented amongst the unhoused in LA, according to the folks that answered that poll, Black folks don't deserve access to a level playing field to access college. We don't deserve reparations for the decades of racist policies that have deprived us of economic opportunities. And we are so despicable that we don't even deserve a place to sleep other than the cold sidewalks of Los Angeles. Now, these aren't my thoughts. These aren't the thoughts of my listeners, but these are the thoughts apparently of people in this poll. I told you today was a big news day and I was keeping it a buck. More today's trending news and my expert contributors when we come forward right here on KBLA Talk 1580.
Gotta stay fresh, ma. House shot with a rep spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
Pick up the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4, only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580.
Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
Back, and you are listening to Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin, and we are tracking all of today's news, and it has been a big news day. Joining me in this hour is Dr. Nii-Quartelai Quartey. He is a KBLA National Political Affairs Analyst, and he is host of A More Perfect Union right here on KBLA Sundays at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. Also joining us is Dr. Omekongo Dibinga. He is a professor at American University and author of a new book, Lies About Black People. All right, Dr. Nee, you and I started texting about this decision early this morning, so I'm so glad you were able to join me. This was a gut punch. We knew it was coming. It doesn't make the pain any less intense or real. What was your reaction when you saw this decision on affirmative action coming down from this Supreme Court?
Well, Areva, my reaction wasn't all that different from the reaction of Reverend Al Sharpton. And just earlier today, I had a chance to join that press conference with Reverend Al and a number of some of our national civil rights leaders reacting to this decision. And as Reverend Al noted, there's lots of outrage to go around, but nobody is surprised. And, he pointed out the fact that Trump, had remarked that he had put 3 justices on the court, 3 justices that were a part of pushing this decision over the top, really taking credit for this. And so, this wasn't, just your run-of-the-mill decision from the Supreme Court. This was the result of a more politicized, a highly politicized, a far-right Supreme Court. And, one of the things that he brought up and that I've been hearing from lots of different corners is that a lot of folks are worried about how folks may misuse or misinterpret this decision, particularly leaders in corporate America, leaders in higher education. Might this decision be used to further backslide from all the commitments that we had heard in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and too many others to name? Might they use this decision as a way to say, you know what, we're not going to sponsor events and organizations, that are doing racial justice type work? That seems to be a major concern. And so I think a lot of folks are really quick to get out there and make sure people understand what this decision is and what it isn't. Young people will still have an opportunity to talk about, any hurdles that they have overcome related to their racial identity. It just means that in terms of scoring, the Harvard University and University of North Carolina specifically can't narrowly look at race. They can look at it in the context of personal statements, but not in any other context.
Yes, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because Justice Roberts, who wrote the majority opinion, did leave that very, very narrow window open for universities to do just that. But this is still going to be devastating. Professor Dibinga, you are on a college campus. Tell us what you're thinking in this moment about what this may do to the composition of students on campuses like yours.
Well, I fear that we're going to see what happened in other states. When you see what happened in California, where the population of students, dropped by 50%, as they said, Black and Latino students, after, affirmative action was banned in California in the USC system there. I'm fearing some of that's what's going to happen. I also speak, as you know, Areva, at schools across the country from kindergarten to 12th grade, doing motivational talk on diversity. And I know that in those spaces, I'm seeing people who are starting to become afraid to even apply to these schools. We started to see this just under the Trump administration in general, as things like hate crimes and things were on the rise. And that's when we started to see more students start to get interested in HBCUs. Applications were on the rise, and parents are like, you're going to go to an HBCU for Black kids because it was considered to be safer. But now we're also seeing with decisions like this and other schools that try to implement these types of policies, there's going to be this fear of even applying, because there's going to be the belief that they're not going to get it in the first place. As it relates to the students on campuses I speak at now, including American University, we're already dealing with issues relating to diversity as it stands now and lack of representation. And so I know that on American University's campus and other campuses across the country that I'm dealing with, there is this fear that the little progress that has been made in the eyes of the students as it relates to DEI is just going to be further pushed back. And I'm really concerned about how they feel like they're going to really get involved, because one of the things we have to be mindful of is that because the Supreme Court and these guys on the Republican side, their rulings always leave wiggle room for things. The wiggle room exposes people and organizations and schools to more lawsuits, because it's not really directly said. People could say, oh, this school increased their number of Black students by 2%. It must be this affirmative action policy. It could not just they were actually qualified. And so schools are going to be wrapped up in litigation over this for years to come as well. And I think that's also the point of having rulings like this. ruled with language like this, I should say.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I think we should step back, Dr. Nee, and really give people a definition of affirmative action, particularly in the context of college admissions, because I think some people erroneously believe, which is why when these surveys come out, people often, the numbers skew towards people not approving of or not supporting affirmative action. And one, it has to do with how the questions are asked. But two, I think it also has to do with so much disinformation that has been disseminated about affirmative action. People think that affirmative action means take an unqualified student and jump them to the front of the line over a qualified pool of students. Give us the true definition of how affirmative action works in the context of college admissions.
That's right. Well, I think you're right, Areva. We've got to start the clock not at June 29th, 2023, but we've got to start this clock way back to 1619, right? We got to start this clock back to 1865, right? And I think what is intellectually dishonest, and we're seeing this, from folks that are celebrating this decision today. What we're seeing from those folks is jubilation around this idea, that now suddenly it's going to be a fair playing field. If we just sort of engage in color blindness, then racism goes away, that racial injustice goes away. Affirmative action has always been about reconciling the opportunity for education, for further education, for higher education and economic mobility, reconciling, that American dream with the fact that historically Americans that look like us, have been kept out of that dream, and not by accident, right? And so, this was a remedy that really started under former President Richard Nixon, a Republican, to address the systemic racism that Black folks have had to contend with by saying, okay, we will consider race as a factor in admission. This is deeply personal, Areva. I remember back in high school, I grew up in the Bay Area, and I'll never forget when one of my classmates, who was an overachiever, she had a 4.2 GPA, and I'll never forget being in the parking lot at school, and she walked up to me and said, "I heard that you got into the University of Southern California." And I said, "Yeah, it's true." And she said, "Well, I guess if I could check Black on a box, I guess I would have got into USC too." Wow. Never forgot.
Wow.
And that was my experience, but that was the experience of so many of our listeners, of so many people, that are sad about this decision today. It is a reminder, that we have to work twice as hard for half as much, and when we do, and we get opportunities to move forward to succeed, people like to put a little asterisk by us. Yeah. And say, well, must be because you're Black, must be because you're a woman, must be because, of this. And so, this is a clarion call to action for all of us. We can't just sort of sit and be in a state of shock about this. Yes, we should feel those things, but we can't sit in this place. Right.
We got to move forward for sure.
Got to move forward.
And I'm glad you shared with that. I've been sharing today myself in some interviews, my own personal story, and it relates to what you talked about, Dr. Dibinga, the chilling effect. I remember I was graduating high school, had been accepted into Washington University in St. Louis, but wanted to go to Chicago and was thinking about applying to the University of Chicago, which is a much higher ranked school nationally, even than WashU, even though WashU is a great school. And I remember telling my brother that I didn't think I could get into WashU. And he says, yes, you can, because of affirmative action. They'll take into consideration not only your race, but they'll take into consideration that he and I were first generation to go to college. We were, in a housing project, all of the disadvantages that we had in growing up. And what affirmative action does in admissions is take students who are qualified, who are eminently qualified to get into schools, moves them from pile A to pile B. So pile B are all the kids that have the grades, that have the test scores, that have everything else that the schools say they require. And then they go to pile B and start looking at other things that may impact you or have impacted you. And race being one of many factors, geographically, where you grew up, you know, what your parents did, and all kinds of other factors. And then that may move you from pile B to pile C. But never, you couldn't move from A to C if you didn't have the grades to go into pile B. And I applied to University of Chicago, was waitlisted, but then accepted, graduated magna cum laude, went on, got accepted to every law school in the country, graduated with honors from Harvard. And not to say, look at Areva, I'm so smart, but the reality was I was smart enough to get into those schools. And but for my brother encouraging me, I would have been that student that was afraid to apply because I didn't think that I could cut it in a school as rigorous, educationally, academically, as rigorous as the University of Chicago. And so I fear that there are students like me sitting at home today who have what it takes, have what it will take to be successful in those schools, but yet they are afraid to apply because of this ruling. That's what frightens me, and that's why we have to continue to fight, as you said, Dr. Nee. When we come forward, more on the historic overturning of affirmative action in college admissions and this huge decision by the jurors to not hold the resource officer accountable in the Parkland school shooting. That's a blockbuster decision today by the jury as well. We're going to continue to follow all of today's trending news right here on KBLA Talk 1580.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest bar,
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
The bounce is back.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
I'm young, gifted, and black.
KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation in scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Connection established. Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black. Your black. Your black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rec spot. Shot with a rec spot. Shot with a rec spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station.
We are back, and I'm joined in this hour by Dr. Nii-Quartelai Quartey. He's KBLA National Political Affairs Analyst and host of A More Perfect Union, right here on KBLA Sundays at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. And Dr. Omekongo Dibinga. He's a professor, and he's out with a new book called Lies About Black People. Now, beyond what this ruling, the overturning of affirmative action in college admissions will do to college campuses, I want to talk about the political fallout. We already know that some recent polls say that 35% of folks are support cash payments for descendants of slaves, whereas 65% of those oppose it. And depending on what poll you look at, those numbers can even be higher in terms of the opposition. And DeSantis is out hitting Donald Trump, saying, Donald Trump, in 2015, you said you were okay with affirmative action. Whereas today he comes out applauding the court, taking credit for the 3 justices that he appointed, saying they got it right. What is going to be the fallout, Dr. Nee, of this decision? And is it going to favor Republicans or the Democrats, you think?
Well, I mean, I think these decisions, the decision around affirmative action and some of the movement around reparations has the ability to animate folks on the right, to animate Republican voters, to excite them and to remind them that, part of how they got the victory around affirmative action was the Supreme Court appointment of former President Trump. And, you have somebody who like Ron DeSantis, who has not mixed words, saying that, he's not crazy about Trump's appointments to the Supreme Court, and would intend to appoint Supreme Court justices more in the vein of Justice Clarence Thomas and Justice Alito, right? And so indicating he's willing to go even further to the right than President Trump. And so, as long as there are decisions like this that are likely to animate, voters on both sides, particularly Republicans, then I think that may bode well for energizing folks on the right. Now, I think folks on the left need to figure out, what are we going to do about it? We gotta lick our wounds quickly, and roll up our sleeves and figure out what are we going to do about it. And, Areva, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that our friend Dr. Sean Harper over at the University of Southern California, a lot of our listeners might remember that, he runs the USC Race and Equity Center there. Well, tomorrow they're doing a national convening, of folks, of leaders in higher education and beyond, in terms of, strategies that they can employ and things that they can do that are legally allowable as an affirmative reaction to the affirmative action decision.
No, and that's going to be happening all over the country. I know the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the ACLU, and so many national civil rights organizations and educational social justice organizations are doing exactly what you said, coming together, rolling up their sleeves and trying to figure out what, if anything, can be done, what additional litigation perhaps that can be done. If there's something at the executive action level, if there's an executive order that can be issued by Joe Biden. I think I got a note that his educational team and legal team are also looking at what he can do from his branch, the executive branch. But Dr. Dibinga, I think we have to put this in the context too of what's happening around higher education. Mm-hmm. It's not just college admissions, right? It's the banning of books. It's the ways that states like Florida are trying to control what professors can teach, what courses can be taught, issues around diversity, limiting funding for programs that really try to advance diversity. Are you fearful that colleges are going to suffer in ways that make it very difficult for people of color to find them safe to even attend?
Well, I can't say I'm fearful because it's already happening, right? We talk about fearful like something that's to come. We're living this now. Everything that you said could happen, it is happening. I had one friend who was talking about a colleague of theirs went to Florida to teach in Chicano studies. That's his specialty. Can't even say Chicano now, right? And he already moved to go down there to do this work. You see what's happening in Wisconsin, where the Republicans there are working to remove millions of dollars from the University of Wisconsin system just because they have DEI programs, and they want to get rid of all of them. And there are already close to 200 people within the University of Wisconsin system that are on board to lose their jobs. And Wisconsin is not a black state, right? So their system of 13 schools, they're all going to be losing funding, and if they don't change their ways. And this is also has to be a message to white people. We saw this in Florida as well. Any program or policy that targets black people is ultimately going to target white people as well. So in Florida, when you didn't have a problem with quote unquote critical race theory and teaching all of this stuff about black and brown people, and you didn't say anything, Ron DeSantis said, oh, for those of y'all who are protesting, I'm not going to have AP classes at the schools. And so now you got white kids down there who may not be getting AP credit for their classes. University of Wisconsin system, the tuition is going to be going up. Those white students are going to have to be paid more. So in addition to the real problems that black people and brown people are going to face on a daily basis in terms of hiring, in terms of applying to these schools, in terms of being able to study their history in these places where black and brown history is being erased, white people also have to realize that unless they got some type of legacy thing going on, unless they're wealthy in some way, shape, or form, there are poor white people celebrating this Harvard decision like this increases their chances to get in. That's not how it works, right? That's not how this whole privilege system works. And so so we have to be mindful of this now. This is why we need, I'm glad, you all talked about these convenings that are going to happen, because we need more lawyers, out there like you, Areva, who are going to be bringing more lawsuits to the Supreme Court to start to challenge this stuff. And if we don't do that, really, at the end of the day, we are going to let them win. And lastly, to your last segment, I will say, the way you ended it, when you were talking about graduating magna cum laude and all of that, was so poignant, because at the end of the day, no matter how people get in, you got to take the same test to get out.
Hello, you're right about that. And you got to get in and you got to get out. And you don't get out unless you put in the work, unless you have the chops to get out. And what we do know is that so many white students that get in, it's because they've had years of private tutoring. They've had years of, Saturday classes and after school classes, and folks that, taught them how to write or even helped them to write their essays to get into school, and all of these extra things that made their application so much better on paper, at least, than students who didn't have access to those same, resources. And again, that's why this decision makes you so upset, because these Republicans act as if we are inherently inferior, and we are not. We are not inferior in any way. But if you tie my hands behind my back and you shackle my feet and put me in a race with someone who is completely free, I am likely to lose. I can be the best runner on the planet, but if I can't use my legs and I can't use my hands, then I can't run the same race that someone who's been training with private trainers and getting the best diet and, massages every day. I'm not going to win that race. And that's what happens to African Americans. And me in that housing project growing up, I didn't even know a person that had graduated from college. So let's known having someone to provide me with the kind of support. And then let's talk about these public schools where kids may have 400 kids and one college counselor. One college counselor, and the college counselor who's going to tell you, like who told me, you should think about a state school. So, big old conversation we can go on. Is so many ways it irritates me. Dr. Nee, if folks are this outraged about race being a factor, not a sole, but a factor in college admissions, what chances does this California reparations report have in becoming law in any shape or form? Because the backlash that we've been talking about is real. And just because you are a Democrat in California doesn't mean that you are not subject to some kind of backlash, or that you may not be committing what some would call political suicide if you get behind this reparations plan, which could cost the state trillions of dollars if implemented.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very telling. The fact that there were 115 recommendations. If the California state legislature can't choose one, I think that is a serious indictment of whether or not the supermajority of Democrats in the California state legislature are who they say they are. Out of 115 recommendations, if at least some of those don't become law, if at least some of those don't get adopted to be a part of the party platform for the Democrats, and I would dare even say in places like California, there may be a few recommendations that the Republican Party in California might be interested in. But bottom line, you can't say to Black people that I want your vote if I don't believe that any of these recommendations around reparations, are worthy enough to do something about. And so, for Governor Newsom, who has aspirations way beyond being governor, I think the ball's in his court. I think the ball's in the court of the Speaker of the California State Assembly to shepherd, at least some of these recommendations through to passage. It's on the Senate pro tem to do something. I mean, again, Democrats can't be Democrats in name only. People that believe in freedom and justice for all, whether you're a Democrat or you're libertarian or Republican, whatever, you can't show up in name only. And so, this reparations set of recommendations, it's going to turn the lights on, and we may not like what we see.
We may see a bunch of little bugs scurrying about as the lights get turned on. We're going to track that very closely. When we come forward, I want to talk about this not guilty verdict in the Scott Peterson trial and really ask the question, should resource officers, school police officers be held accountable when there are mass shootings on school campuses? Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
I'm young, gifted, and black.
KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 15.
We are tracking today's trending news, including two big legal cases. And in hour two, we are going deep with a law professor and individuals who have been involved in the litigation involving the affirmative action case that was decided today by the Supreme Court. We're going to get their take on what this decision means. We're going to analyze not only the majority opinion, but also the dissenting opinion by the three liberal justices. So that's one conversation you don't want to miss. But before we end hour one, I want to talk about this big decision today by a jury in Florida that said that Scott Peterson was not guilty of neglect. He was not guilty for not running into that high school in Parkland, Florida, 5 years ago, when a shooter was in that school, roaming from the first floor to the third floor, killing 17 students, leaving dozens others wounded. It was a very emotional day this morning in that courtroom as the jury verdict was read. The defendant, Scott Peterson, erupted in tears. His lawyer was crying. But you also saw the family members of victims who lost their lives in that shooting. They were in tears. They essentially said this was a miscarriage of justice. They believe Scott Peterson should have been held responsible for not going into that school and doing something to try to prevent the death, the murder of those students. This was a tough one, Dr. Nee, because school police officers have not traditionally been charged criminally for failing, not for taking action, but for acts of omission. And we know down in Uvalde, Texas, those officers that sat outside and apparently didn't go into that school are under investigation and may be criminally charged as well. What do you think about this jury verdict? Do you think the jury got it right?
Well, Areva, let me just say my heart goes out to all the families of the folks who lost their lives at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. This hurts. This hurts to know that somebody who had the ability to do the thing that the parents could not do, which was to protect their kids, to keep further harm from happening. There was a complete dereliction of that duty. And as a result, people lost their lives. I mean, he was waiting in a little cove for like 30 to 40 minutes. 30 to 40 minutes. And so, though the verdict is not guilty, it does not rid him of judgment in the public square of a level of cowardice. And that's something that he has to live with for the rest of his life. Though he was not criminally convicted, I have a feeling that he may find a number of civil suits filed by the family. And so I don't think he is by any way, out of the thick of this. I think this will likely continue. But it sends a mixed message to school resource officers who have the power to make bad situations, keep bad situations from getting worse. It sends a mixed message to them, that, they can kind of get away with not doing everything they can to keep our kids safe.
Yeah. What are you thinking about this, Dr. Dibinga? You're on a college campus. Obviously, something happened with Scott Peterson. Maybe he froze. Maybe he got nervous. His defense team argued that the sounds of bullets were coming from so many different directions. He couldn't tell where the bullets were coming from, that he wasn't just sitting outside twiddling his thumbs, that he was trying to make an assessment, and that it would not have been prudent for him to run into the building unless he had more information. He's trying to gather that additional information. The jurors obviously bought that and said, look, I'm thinking these jurors said there's a lot of blame to go around, but they were not willing to hold Scott Peterson accountable. They even found him not guilty on a perjury charge, and the perjury charge had to do with the false statement allegedly he made to the police about what he was doing and why he didn't go into the school. Are you surprised by this jury verdict?
I don't know if I'm going to say I'm surprised, but I'm definitely saddened by it. The families of these victims deserve so much more. And one of the things he said, which just sticks in my mind, was, I finally got my life back now. And one of the parents of the kids who were killed said, well, I can't get my son's life back. So even in this, there wasn't the wherewithal to show some respect to these families. And the fact of the matter, whether we're talking SROs, whether we're talking security guards, whether we're talking police, they are not constitutionally bound to risk their lives for us. Despite the fact that they may have a gun and all the training in the world. And to be quite honest, I believe, as the doctor was saying, this is going to lead to more officers and SROs kind of feeling like this kind of I feared for my life type of situation and not really intervene. There's no real duty to intervene. And so it's a second injustice on these families. And I really hope that there are some civil suits that are filed that allow them to get the type of justice, because they were just failed by everybody. And I went and spoke in the Parkland area a couple of weeks after the shooting, and the trauma that's down there was just relived again for those families. And this is wrong.
Yeah, I want to comment too on the comment you said that Scott Peterson made after the trial. There was an impromptu press conference with Peterson, his wife, and his attorney. I thought it was so tone deaf. I was really embarrassed by the conduct of that attorney. It was not the time to come out and to celebrate the victory of getting not guilty. I know as a lawyer, you have a job to do, and your job is to get your client off. He was happy that there was a not guilty verdict for his client. That means as a lawyer, he did his job. But man, it was not appropriate to be outside celebrating and attacking the prosecution and attacking the former sheriff of that community. It just was so tone deaf to be, and really just embarrassing for me as a lawyer. The tragedy is real. These families have been through so much, and I'm not sure the jurors got it wrong. I think it was a very steep hill to climb in the first place. We don't typically hold police officers accountable for not running into danger, or firemen for running into burning houses. We may need to, revisit our statutes in states and federal statutes to determine if we want to hold them accountable in that way. So from a legal standpoint, it was a very, very difficult case to prosecute. I understand why the prosecution brought the case, obviously trying to bring some justice for these families. And the families also are very, very upset because the same jury determined that the shooter would not face the death penalty, but instead would get life in prison without parole. That was also just shocking and devastating to these families that have been through so much. Hey, the reality is when we talk about these school shootings, we have to talk not just about officers and whether they should, lay in the cut and wait or run into these situations, but we got to talk about guns and gun control and access to guns and cowards like Ron DeSantis, who are governors in states like Florida, and the governor of Texas that refuse to enact sensible gun laws. And one of the dads, I think you may have seen him too, Dr. Dibinga, said tomorrow in Florida becomes an open, no permit carry state. So rather than making it tougher in terms of getting access to guns, Governor DeSantis is making it easier to get access to guns. So we got a lot to do in this country around school safety. And obviously the resource officers play a role, but our elected officials play an even bigger role, and we need to hold them accountable. And Ron DeSantis should pay a price, and it should not be going to the White House. It should be losing his seat as governor, because the way he's handled that shooting and others in Florida is just downright shameful. We are out of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Nii-Quartelai. Catch him on KBLA on Sundays at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. And thank you, Dr. Dibinga. Make sure you get a copy of his book, Lies About Black People. We are so much smarter as a result of having both of you on, and I can't wait until you are back. Stay with us an hour or two. We are breaking down that historic decision overturning affirmative action in college admissions with some brilliant experts who will be with me in hour two. KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk